Today we're going to be talking about the Toyota Prius, specifically the 4th generation Prius, which just means any model from 2015 to 2022. We'll go over the history, we'll talk about the specs, we'll go over the interior and the exterior, and we'll talk about things to look for when buying one of these things used. Now, before we get into the video, this specific Prius right here is listed for sale on our website, privateauto.com, the for sale by owner marketplace that lets you buy or sell a car anytime, any place. Now, back to the video. Let's talk about some history. Now, the Toyota Prius might get a rep for not being the most glamorous car. It is probably one of the more important cars that have ever been made. The Toyota Prius is somewhat of a trailblazer when it comes to hybrid vehicles. The 1st generation Prius was the world's first ever mass-produced hybrid electric vehicle. Now, it wasn't all blue skies and smooth sailing for the Prius. In the beginning, it had a pretty rough start. The prototypes were, in short, a disaster. The car could barely drive half a mile.
You're driving too fast, Jay.
The batteries wouldn't function properly if they were charged too fast or drained too fast.
You're charging too fast, Jay.
And speaking of batteries, a lot of the prototypes were actually catching on fire, minor explosions maybe, and the gas mileage was actually worse than the current gen Toyota Corolla, which, if I remember correctly, the whole point of a hybrid was to have good efficiency. It's not the greatest look for a car, especially when it's a new technology. Luckily, Toyota actually has some of the world's most insane engineers, and they fixed all of those problems in short order. A year after the car was released, it became Japan's Car of the Year, which is kind of crazy considering all of the issues that the prototype had. In 2000, Toyota decided to finally start selling these things outside of Japan. And at first, in America, it was kind of a lukewarm reception. The Prius at the time was nothing to really scream and shout about. Honda was already selling the Insight a year prior. They didn't really start seeing any sort of crazy success until 2004. The 2nd generation Prius was an absolute hit. The first year, they more than doubled their expected sales and almost doubled those numbers the following year. They gave the car a massive facelift, and they changed it from a sedan to a hatchback. Now, this was a hybrid that had some sort of appeal and brought something new to the market. The 2nd generation Prius was truly revolutionary, and the cherry on top is that Toyota decided to add a 150,000 mile, 10-year warranty on top of that. Not even to mention they upgraded the fuel economy to get 60 miles to the gallon city and 50 highway. That was insane back then. Again, this car pretty much shaped the entire future of the hybrid market. In 2010, Toyota rolled out the 3rd generation. Now, initially people were scared because they thought Toyota is bound to increase the sales because of the crazy success of the 2nd generation. We were wrong. They actually lowered the price in order to make it more competitive with the Honda Insight. Now, what's also notable about this generation is that it introduced the first plug-in hybrid as well. They also introduced a compact model, the Prius C, and a wagon model, the Prius V. With the release of the 4th generation, the Prius's wow factor had kind of already outstayed its welcome. For the first time ever, sales numbers in the Prius finally decided to decline, which is unfortunate because that doesn't reflect on the car's performance whatsoever. In fact, the 4th generation of the Prius is to be considered one of the most reliable hybrids to ever exist. Like the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd generations had their share of reliability problems when they started to get older. The 4th generation basically solved all of that. And because of its success, other car manufacturers started to make hybrids of their own, saturating the market more. So the declining sales numbers weren't necessarily because the car was bad, mostly just because the car had lost its wow factor. Now, something worth mentioning about the 4th generation is they actually decided to stop making the Prius C and the Prius V models, and the Prius plug-in hybrid was changed to the Prius Prime. And finally, in 2023, Toyota rolled out the latest generation of the Prius, the 5th generation Prius. Now, Toyota knew they had to do something different with this car. Being a hybrid was no longer a novelty, so they gave the car a complete cosmetic overhaul. For the first time ever, the Prius looked pretty dang good. Of course, this is subjective, but I think this looks significantly better than previous models. Right, now that we're all caught up, let's go talk about some specs. Right off the bat, when we're talking about specs, there's a distinction that needs to be made. There are 2 different versions of the Prius. There is the Prius Hybrid and the Prius Prime. So the Prius Hybrid is a hybrid electric engine, while the Prius Prime is a plug-in hybrid that has an actual battery that can be driven as an EV for a set amount of miles. While the Prius can be driven in electric mode, it can only do so for a limited amount of miles and can only go up to 20 miles an hour. This is not true for the Prius Prime. So going forward, this information only applies to the hybrid Prius. To start things off underneath the hood, it's got a 4-cylinder engine with a CVT transmission. It'll give you about 121 horsepower with 120 pound-feet of torque. That might not be appealing to most people, however, this isn't a performance car. This is a hybrid car. Where this car shines is its fuel economy. You'll get 54 miles city and 50 highway. While you might be gapped by a town and country, those insane gas prices won't hit you nearly as hard. It's also worth mentioning that you'll get about 600 miles of range depending on how you drive, so give or take. Alright, let's talk about the exterior. Starting at the front, you'll have a sleek aerodynamic hood, which can help and contribute to the fuel economy. You'll get these sleek looking modern headlights, which in fact have auto high beams, so you don't accidentally laser the person in front of you. Something else that you'll find unique is the Toyota badge. It has blue outlines indicating that it's a hybrid. Moving on to the side, you'll notice these aggressive, kind of sportier lines stamped throughout the panels. I'm a fan. I'm also kind of a fan of the rear window, how it kind of like wraps around the side of the rear quarter panel. You'll also get blinkers in the side mirror, which I always think is a plus. On the rear, you'll have that famous piece of tinted glass on the actual hatchback door, which is separate from the actual rear windshield. I'm also a fan of the rear taillights and how they kind of like wrap around the car. Moving on to the interior, if you have an LE trim or the Eco L trim, you'll have cloth seats. Every other trim is going to be the Softex leather. Now, I drive a Toyota, and I will say those seats are actually so nice. If you have the choice between getting one trim or the other, the seats are worth it alone. Up front in the middle, you'll have a touchscreen with Apple CarPlay enabled, but not Android Auto. Keep that in mind. Now, your touchscreen will look like this if you have a limited trim, and this if you have any other trim. Not sure how I feel about the vertical touchscreen, but to each their own. Something else unique to the Prius is going to be the gear selector. So kind of off to the side there, you'll have a little lever, and if you go like out and down, that's to get into drive. You go out and up, that's to get into reverse. If you want to put it in park, you'll press the button next to the lever. Kind of interesting. I'd say it's a common thing for this car to have a little bit of a learning curve. If you haven't driven a hybrid car before, some things in here might feel a little bit different. Another thing that might feel a little bit different is going to be the gauge cluster, or the lack thereof. This car doesn't actually have a gauge cluster. Your speed and information is actually going to be displayed on the second screen above the main touchscreen, or on the heads-up display. Yes, this car does have a heads-up display. It's actually kind of cool, but does take some getting used to. Something else worth mentioning, if you have the XLE trim or limited trim, you'll have a Qi charger, which is just a wireless charger for your phone in the middle console. Kind of cool. Moving to the back, your seats will actually fold down in a 40-60 ratio, so you can have one seat up, two seat folded, or vice versa, or just all of them down, which is nice because it gives you a ton of room for storage. And the back is even more spacious because it's a hatchback. Now, because this is a newer Toyota, it comes equipped with Toyota Safety Sense, and if you don't know what Toyota Safety Sense is, basically it's got two things. So it's pre-collision avoidance, which it'll like automatically emergency brake if it senses that you're about to get in a crash. It also comes with radar cruise control, which I think is absolutely fantastic. Again, I drive a Toyota, and when I'm on road trips, this thing is amazing. I set my speed, it follows the car at a set distance that I can choose, and it also keeps the speed up to whatever the speed limit that you set. Not only is that awesome for your legs, but it's also awesome for your passengers that could be prone to car sickness. Now let's talk about what to look for when buying one of these things used, and some general tips and tricks and advice. Now, off the bat, one of the best pieces of advice I can give you is do your research. If you haven't driven a hybrid, or you just don't know anything about hybrids, I would strongly recommend looking up some YouTube videos and kind of get familiar with how a hybrid system works. Hybrid engines are a little bit more complicated and are prone to braking in different ways that typical cars aren't. They have different maintenance schedules and different maintenance costs. For example, a Prius doesn't have an alternator, it doesn't have a drive belt, and it doesn't have a starter. The brakes tend to last about 100,000 miles as well. However, the battery and some of the other hybrid components do have a bit of a shelf life. Basically, what this means is you can avoid some common maintenance costs early on at the cost of potentially needing heavier replacements later down the road. Now, this is awesome if you buy the car relatively newer and plan to hold on to the car till it dies. But if you're buying it used, this is something you need to keep in mind. Once the car gets to around about 100, 150,000 miles, you could potentially start to need to look out for a battery replacement. And those are typically around $2,000 to $3,000. Now, I say this not to sway you away from buying a hybrid, more so to keep you more informed. Because, I mean, while you may need to pay $2,000 to $3,000 to replace the batteries, you haven't had to replace the brakes in 100,000 miles, you haven't had to replace a drive belt, you haven't had to replace a bad starter. You see what I mean? So definitely keep these things in mind when buying one of these Priuses. Hybrids, and Priuses in particular, used to get a bad rep for reliability. And admittedly, the first through third generation Toyotas were not the best things to have if they were over 100,000 miles. Not the fourth generation. The fourth generation Prius has been through its paces, and Toyota has learned a lot from its mistakes. Toyota is an insanely reputable brand and is known for its reliability. This rings true with the fourth generation Prius. If you're going to buy a Prius used, this is definitely the model you want to buy. If serviced properly, these things can last well beyond 250,000 miles. With that being said, always do a test drive and always get your car inspected by a third-party trusted mechanic. All right, now that we talked about all of that, let's go ahead and talk about pricing. So MSRP initially for the base model was about $25K, $29 for about middle trim, and $33 for the top trim. Now it's projected that the fourth generation Prius will hold 82% of its value over a 5-year period. That's kind of wild. If anything, that just speaks to the reliability of this specific generation hybrid. Now, because of this, the 2020 model price is a little bit higher than most cars its age. From what I could tell, the average cost as of when this video is posted is about $23,000. But again, always keep current on the price of your model that you're looking for. Always know what everybody else is selling theirs for, and don't let any private seller or especially dealerships take advantage of you, because dealerships definitely will take advantage of you if they can. All right, let's get into some final thoughts. If you're looking for a relatively cheap daily car, if you have a longer commute, and especially if your commute is in the city, this car is absolutely for you. You're gonna save tons of money on gas and a lot of wear on your cars, because hybrids tend to do better in city environments compared to their gas engine counterparts. Again, if you do a lot of city driving, this car is for you. Anyways, that's about it for today. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. We'll do our best to answer them to our best abilities. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you in the next one.